Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Today we are walking straight into a philosophical minefield.
We absolutely are. We're looking at a real heavyweight clash at the Oxford Union. I mean, this strikes at the very core of how we see the world. On one side, you've got God, miracles, the foundations of morality, and on the other, unapologetic atheism, evolutionary biology, and this accusation that faith isn't just wrong, it's actually a dangerous suspension of critical thinking.
So the question isn't just, does God exist? It's much darker.
It is. Is religion actually evil?
And we're breaking down a head-to-head debate. It's between the journalist Mehdi Hasan and, well, the world's most famous atheist, Professor Richard Dawkins.
And let's be clear, this is not a polite tea time chat. Dawkins is there to put faith on trial.
And the setting just amplifies that tension. The Oxford Union, I mean, that's legendary ground. You've had Churchill, Benazir Bhutto, they've all stood there.
Right.
But for Dawkins, this is home turf. He's comfortable, he's confident, and he is ready to dismantle the opposition.
So let's get right into the meat of it. Before they can even argue about whether God is good or bad, they have to sort of establish what they're even talking about. Dawkins is famous for the term atheist, but I think a lot of people misunderstand his specific definition. He's claiming, absolute certainty.
That's a common misconception, yeah. And Hasan pushes him on it right away.
Yeah.
He asks if Dawkins is 100% sure.
And Dawkins, being a scientist, he has to admit, well, technically, no, he can't be 100% sure God doesn't exist. You can't prove a negative.
But he doesn't just leave it there. He uses this very specific and frankly pretty funny analogy to explain his position.
He calls himself a leprechaunist.
A leprechaunist and a nefariist.
Which is such a great way to reframe the whole argument.
It is. He's basically saying, look, you can't strictly prove there isn't a leprechaun in your garden.
Right.
Or a pig unicorn flying around somewhere. But the lack of evidence is so overwhelming that we all live our lives assuming they don't exist. He's arguing that God belongs in that exact same category.
So it's not about impossibility, it's about probability.
Negligible probability. He treats Yahweh with the same skepticism he treats a garden fairy.
And once that baseline is set, that God is, in his view, extremely unlikely, well, the gloves come off. Hasan brings up the God delusion and reads back one of the most blistering descriptions of the Old Testament God ever written.
Oh, it's a rhetorical grenade. He really emptied the dictionary for that one.
I have the list here, and it's worth reading just to feel the level of hostility Dawkins has for this concept. He describes the Old Testament God as a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak.
And he keeps going.
He does. A vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, and a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal,
Just getting started.
pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capricious, malevolent bully.
In the debate, the tension is so high that when Hasan finishes, he actually congratulates Dawkins on pronouncing megalomaniacal correctly. It's like the only moment the audience can breathe.
It's a funny moment, but Hasan's challenge is serious. He asks, do you really believe this? Because for a believer, that's just offensive hyperbole.
And Dawkins doesn't back down for a second. He doubles down. He argues that if you actually read the Old Testament, the flood, the smiting, the laws, that his description is factually accurate based on the text.
He calls the character hideous.
Hideous, a monster, and, quote, the most unpleasant character in all fiction.
That word fiction is crucial, though, isn't it?
Hugely important. He isn't saying a real being exists who is this evil. He's saying the character depicted in the book is a moral nightmare. His question is, why would you want to worship that?
Right. Even if you believe in some creative intelligence, why pin it to this specific, jealous, vindictive bully?
Exactly. Hasan tries to pivot to the New Testament, saying God is widely advertised as being gentler there.
Advertised is a good word for it.
Dawkins agrees. He concedes the New Testament is less brutal, but he still finds the theology objectionable. The main point here is that Dawkins refuses to grant the Bible any moral authority.
Because its central figure is a moral monster.
In his view, yes.
And this leads us straight into the core of the debate. It's not just that the character is mean. Dawkins has a very specific argument for why faith itself, the act of believing without evidence, is a force for evil in the real world.
This is the absolute core of his philosophy. To Dawkins, faith is belief without evidence, And he argues that when you don't need evidence to believe something, you become immune to argument.
You're essentially shutting down the mechanism for changing your mind.
Precisely. If I say, I believe the Earth is round because of satellite photos, you can show me evidence, we can debate.
Yeah.
But if I say, I believe this because I have faith, the conversation is over.
It's an
It is. And Dawkins argues that this mindset can justify anything. If your faith tells you to do something terrible, and you don't need evidence to check that impulse, there's no safety valve. That's where evil creeps in.
And they go straight to the most extreme example of this, the suicide bomber.
It's the ultimate test case for this theory. Dawkins argues that suicide bombing is a direct product of religious faith, specifically the belief in a martyr's paradise.
His logic being that biology wires us for survival, right? We are built to stay alive.
Correct. Natural selection gives us this powerful instinct for self-preservation. To override that, to strap explosives to your chest and detonate them, that requires a psychological counterforce that is stronger than your survival instinct.
And for Dawkins, that force is the promise of instant heaven.
The martyr's reward. He thinks it's the only thing strong enough to make a healthy person blow themselves up.
But Hassan isn't having it. He comes armed with actual data to counter this. He cites Professor Robert Pape from the University of Chicago.
And this is a very significant counterpoint. Professor Pape studied 315 suicide attacks, basically every known case at the time.
Wow.
And his conclusion was that the taproot, as he called it, of suicide terrorism isn't religion at all. It's nationalism. It's about land, politics, occupation.
So the argument is they aren't dying for God, they're dying to get foreign troops off their soil.
Precisely. Hassan points out that the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka were the world leaders in suicide bombing for years, and they were a secular Marxist-Leninist group. No martyr's paradise for them, just a political cause.
That seems like a pretty damning blow to Dawkins' theory. How does he handle that data?
He doesn't dismiss the politics entirely, but he argues it's not the whole story. He focuses on the enabler. He says, sure, the political grievance provides the anger, the why,
but faith provides the how.
or at least it removes the natural barrier to the how. That's his stance. He argues faith makes it, and I'm quoting, a hell of a lot easier to kill yourself because you believe death isn't the end. He asks, without that promise of a martyr's heaven, would they still do it?
It's a fascinating standoff, really.
It is. One is looking at the geopolitical cause, the other at the psychological mechanism. And neither is willing to concede.
Now, in the interest of fairness, and Hassan is very keen on this, he flips the whole atrocity argument back on Dawkins. If we blame religion for violence, what about the violence committed by atheists?
The classic Stalin and Mao defense.
Exactly. It's the inevitable countermove in any debate like this. Hassan says, look at the 20th century, the bloodiest in history. And the worst offenders, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, they were all atheists.
Not just non-religious. They actively persecuted religion.
And Hassan gets really specific. He cites Albania.
He does, and it's a great example. He brings up Article 37 of the Albanian Communist Constitution. It didn't just ignore religion, it constitutionally banned it. The state actively promoted atheistic propaganda.
So Hassan's point is, here's a regime enforcing atheism, and it was a tyrannical nightmare. If religion is the cause of evil, why did removing it lead to so much evil?
It seems like a direct hit. How does Dawkins deflect that?
He engages in a bit of nuance here that is really important. He admits, yes, Stalin and Mao were atheists, but he argues they were not motivated by their atheism.
That sounds a bit like no true Scotsman. Like they weren't real atheists.
It sounds like it, but his distinction is about rationality. He argues Stalin and Mao weren't motivated by skeptical, rational inquiry. They were motivated by dogma.
Okay.
He claims that Marxism functioned exactly like a religion. It demanded blind faith in the state, blind faith in historical destiny, and it suppressed all dissent.
So he's saying the problem isn't God specifically, it's uncritical belief in anything.
Exactly. Whether that belief is in a deity or a dictator, Dawkins argues the mechanism is the same, blind obedience. He wants to spread science and truth, not bully people into atheism like the Albanians did.
Which is a key distinction.
It is. And speaking of raising consciousness, things get a little personal in the next segment. Hassan asks a question that I think a lot of religious people feel when they listen to Dawkins speak. He just asks, point blank, do you believe religious people are intellectually inferior?
Oof. It's a tense moment. You can feel the trap snapping shut. If he says yes, he's an elitist snob. If he says no, he contradicts half his own writing.
So how does he navigate it?
Carefully. He says he does not view the individuals as inferior. He acknowledges there are plenty of religious scientists, plenty of smart people who believe.
What?
But he views the beliefs themselves as intellectual nonsense.
Yeah.
So he separates the person from the idea. He respects the brain, but thinks the software running on it is faulty.
And Hassan tries to pin him down on a specific piece of that software. He brings up the Islamic belief that the Prophet Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse.
The winged horse exchange, this is fascinating because it illustrates the clash of epistemologies, how we know what we know.
Right.
Dawkins just bluntly states that a man flying on a winged horse is scientifically impossible. It didn't happen.
And Hassan challenges him. Can you prove he didn't?
And this brings us right back to the leprechaunist idea. Dawkins retreats to the burden of proof. He says, look, I can't prove he didn't, just like I can't prove a golden unicorn didn't just fly past outside.
The inability to disprove something doesn't make it true.
Exactly. And Dawkins gets visibly frustrated here. He asks why they're even debating a 7th century winged horse instead of the real-world impact of Islam today. He sees it as a distraction. Hassan sees it as a test of his open-mindedness.
And if you thought that was controversial, we need to talk about the child abuse segment. This is probably the most provocative claim Dawkins makes in the entire source.
It's certainly the one that generates the most shock. He has written, and he repeats here, that bringing a child up Catholic, specifically teaching them about the terror of hell, can be arguably worse than sexual abuse.
That is a staggering statement. Worse than sexual abuse. Most people would hear that and just think he's lost his mind.
It is extreme. But he clarifies what he means. He cites a letter he received from a woman in America. She was abused by a priest physically, but she was also told that her Protestant friend who had just died would roast in hell forever.
And she told Dawkins the mental trauma was worse.
She said she got over the physical abuse, but the psychological terror, the mental abuse of believing in eternal torture, took years to overcome. Dawkins argues this is intuitively true. Imagine a child truly believing their skin will peel off and burn forever, for eternity. He sees that as a deep, lasting psychological scar.
And then Hassan actually throws this to the audience for a vote, doesn't he?
He does. He asks the Oxford Union audience, is mental or religious abuse worse, or is physical abuse worse? And the result is a three-way split. A third say physical is worse, a third say religious is worse, and a third say they're equal.
That's surprising. It shows his view, while extreme, actually resonated with a significant part of that room.
It does. It suggests that many people view the fear of hell as a genuine form of trauma. But Dawkins is unrepentant. He insists that terrifying a child with eternal torture is a form of deep abuse.
So let's pivot. If we take away religion, the winged horses, the fear of hell, what replaces it? They get into a deep discussion about science, meaning, and the big one. Why are we here?
Right, the science versus meaning debate. Hassan argues that science is great for how planets move, how cells divide, but can it answer why? Can it answer morality, purpose?
And what does Dawkins say?
He's interesting here. He admits science can't answer moral questions. It can't tell you what's right or wrong. But on the question of why does the universe exist, he argues science is the only method that even stands a chance.
He thinks religion's answers are just guesses.
Worse than guesses, false certainties. He says if science can't answer the origin of the universe yet, religion certainly can't. He sees those answers as just writings from a few centuries ago, pretending to know things they don't.
But Hassan tries to trap him with the multiverse.
This is a great intellectual parry. He says, okay, you don't believe in God because there's no evidence. But you, Richard Dawkins, are willing to entertain the multiverse theory.
Which is the idea that there are billions of universes, and we just happen to be in the one that supports life, right?
Exactly. It's an attempt to explain the fine-tuning of our universe. Hassan calls it hocus pocus. He says it has just as much evidence as God, which is to say, none.
It's the you do it too argument. You believe in something unproven.
Precisely. But Dawkins rejects the equivalence. He explains that the multiverse is not magic. It's a mathematical hypothesis. He describes it as a Darwinian way of solving the problem.
Darwinian? How does that apply to universes?
Through selection. If you have billions of universes with different physical constants, only a tiny minority will be stable enough for stars and life. We're in one of those because we have to be. We couldn't exist in the dead ones.
So for him, an unproven scientific hypothesis is still superior to a faith-based miracle.
Because it's rooted in math and logic, not mythology. He admits it's speculative, but he refuses to put the multiverse on the same shelf as the winged horse.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, where does this leave us? I mean, the debate covers so much ground history, child abuse, physics. What's the takeaway?
I think the fundamental divide is about comfort versus truth. Hassan keeps coming back to the idea that religion provides meaning, community, comfort to billions of people.
And Dawkins.
Dawkins is just relentless in his pursuit of truth, as he sees it. He says, I don't much care about what's good and evil. Actually, I care about what's true. He sees religion as a beautiful distraction from the reality of the universe.
And he has a very specific hope for the future of religion.
He does. In his closing thoughts, he compares the God of Abraham, the God of Jews, Christians, and Muslims, to Zeus and Thor.
The old god.
The dead gods. He points out that nobody worships Thor anymore. Those religions died out. His hope is that modern religion will follow the same path. He wants us to look back on the God of Abraham as just another myth, like Jupiter or Apollo.
Which is a provocative thought to leave you on. Is religion truly destined to vanish like the worship of Thor, or is it an ineradicable part of human nature?
That's the question, isn't it? Hassan argues it's essential to who we are. Dawkins argues it's a virus we can and should cure.
A fascinating glimpse into the modern culture war.
Absolutely. And whether you side with the journalist or the biologist, it forces you to examine why you believe what you believe.
Thank you for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.